Imagine the smell. Not of gunpowder, but the heavy, sour stench of 57,000 unwashed bodies blanketing the Garden Ring in July of 1944. These are not victors marching. This is an army that has been wiped off the face of the earth. You are about to see how physics kills more frighteningly than a bullet. When the concrete of a pillbox crumbles to dust and the pressure differential ruptures lungs and bursts capillaries in the eyes of German officers sitting in total safety. We will show you how 31,000 guns turned the landscape into a lunar surface, where black soil mixed with human remains 3 meters deep. You will learn why, after this march, the Moscow asphalt had to be washed with soap, and why Western newspapers remained shamefully silent about this meat grinder, while their attachés turned pale at the sight of endless fields of burnt metal. History is not written in ink. It is written by tank tracks.
Watch to the end to see exactly how the Wehrmacht's back was broken, and to learn the price paid to wash this trace from the pavement. June 22nd, 1944. The 3rd anniversary of the start of the war. On the Wehrmacht maps in the headquarters of Army Group Center, perfect, geometrically precise order reigns. Field Marshal Ernst Busch confidently traces a pencil along the front line, which is frozen in the shape of a giant balcony looming over the Soviet Union. This Belarusian balcony seems like an impregnable bastion to the Germans. The engineering structures of the Fatherland line are poured from the highest grade concrete, reinforced with armored cupolas, and cover all tank-accessible directions. Sectors of fire intersect, creating zones of total destruction, where the density of machine gun fire reaches 12 bullets per linear meter per minute. Here, in the center, the Germans expect trench warfare, exhausting local skirmishes, and a long, sluggish defense. They are convinced the Russians do not have the strength for a frontal strike. But this confidence is the result of the largest disinformation operation in the history of warfare. While German officers in cozy bunkers near Minsk sip French cognac and discuss news from Normandy, the Soviet High Command is implementing a strategy of total radio-electronic blindness against the enemy. A dense, viscous silence hangs over the airwaves in Belarus. The radio stations are silent. Orders are transmitted only by courier packets, through liaison officers, on motorcycles, and U-2 biplanes. No Morse code, no open communications. A full regime of radio silence for an entire front. It is not just an absence of sound, it is a vacuum that sucks in the enemy's vigilance. However, in the south, in the region of Ukraine and Moldova, the airwaves are tearing apart with activity. Hundreds of radio stations are working there, simulating the concentration of 2 tank armies. Soviet radio operators run force combat orders, fuel requests, and reports on the arrival of equipment trains around the clock. Thousands of mock-up tanks and artillery pieces made of plywood and timber are being built in the forests. Tractor engines run at idle, creating an acoustic background picked up by German sound locators. Trucks dragging logs on cables kick up dust on the roads, simulating the movement of heavy tracked columns. This is theater for an audience of one, and that spectator is Adolf Hitler. The Russians will strike in the south. It is obvious, the general snaps, looking at the radio intercept reports. They want to cut us off from Romanian oil. The center is a secondary sector. There are swamps here. Tanks will not pass here. Herr General, the head of intelligence objects quietly, nervously wiping his monocle. Acoustic stations are picking up the roar of motors north of the Pripyat. The agents are silent, but the forest is humming. It is the partisans warming up their tractors. The commander waves him off. Transfer the SS Panzer Division near Lvov. It will be hot there. Here we can handle it with infantry. The German command swallows the bait whole. Elite tank units, the Wehrmacht's fire brigades, leave their positions in Belarus and move south, exposing the central direction. They are driving to meet phantoms, leaving real death behind them. Berlin's logic is simple and flawed. The terrain in Belarus is an ally of the defense. Impassable marshes, dense forests, wide river floodplains. No one in their right mind would drive mechanized corps through here. A Tiger tank weighing 57 tons would simply sink here, turning into a steel box at the bottom of a swamp. They judge by their own standards, forgetting that Russians know how to fight not thanks to the landscape, but in spite of it. Meanwhile, in the Belarusian forests, a kinetic energy of monstrous power is accumulating. Konstantin Rokossovsky, an engineer of human souls and tank wedges, is solving the problem of trafficability where passage is impossible by definition. Troop movements happen only at night. Headlights are off. Drivers navigate by white patches on the tailgates of the trucks ahead. The speed of the columns is 5 to 10 kilometers per hour. Thousands of trucks, tractors, and self-propelled guns crawl in the dark like a giant steel snake. During the day, everything freezes. Equipment hides under the tree canopies. Camouflage nets intertwine with branches. From the air, there is only forest, a green sea in which 4 fronts have dissolved. 1,200,000 men, 4,000 tanks and self-propelled guns, 24,000 guns and mortars. All this mass of metal, people, and explosives is compressed into a spring on a narrow sector of the front. Logistics are operating at the limit of physical possibility. To feed this armada with shells, hundreds of trains are required. Railway troops widen the track gauge right under the Germans' noses, driving trains into dead ends that did not exist on maps yesterday. Shells are unloaded by hand. Crates are passed along a chain. Tens of thousands of tons of death are stockpiled in forest caponiers. The smell of pine needles mixes with the heavy, oily scent of gun grease and diesel fuel. The camouflage of intentions reaches the level of art. Officers are forbidden to appear on the front line with rank insignia or maps. Reconnaissance is conducted in soldiers' greatcoats. Any careless movement, any glint of optics could betray the presence of an entire army. But the Germans continue to believe in their invulnerability. Their Focke-Wulf reconnaissance planes fly over the forests, photographing emptiness. The films are developed. Analysts look through magnifying glasses and see only haystacks and village roofs. They do not see that the haystacks are camouflaged T-34-85 tanks, and under the roofs of barns stand Katyusha rocket launchers aimed at their dugouts. "All quiet in Sector Center," the duty officer reports to the Wolf's Lair, the Führer's headquarters. "The Russians are digging in. No activity observed." "Excellent," comes the answer from Berlin. "Continue transferring reserves to Ukraine." It was a fatal mistake. A mistake based on arrogance and contempt for the enemy. Hitler's generals saw the map, but they did not see the territory. They considered logistics to be mathematics, while the Russians turned it into a weapon of stealth. The Germans expected a punch in the face, but a knife was already pressed against their liver. The silence over the Belarusian swamps was becoming unbearably dense. The air rang with tension. Soldiers in trenches on both sides felt it. Something was coming. But if the Russians knew the exact time of the beginning of the end, 4 in the morning on June 23rd, the Germans could only guess. They had no time for fear. Its place was taken by the carelessness of the doomed. In the front headquarters, the final watch synchronization is ending. The hands are synchronized to the second. The mechanism is launched. There is no more countdown. A huge machine of destruction, assembled from steel, gunpowder, and human will, is ready to break its chains.
The illusion of calm, so carefully created for months, is about to crumble into dust. But for now, silence. A silence more terrifying than any cannonade. Because behind it stands not just an army, but a verdict. A verdict for Army Group Center, signed by geography itself and an underestimated strategy of camouflage. The Germans look through binoculars to the east and see only the rising sun, unsuspecting that this is the last sunrise for hundreds of thousands of them. And in the forest, 100 meters from their forward posts, a partisan detachment is already placing TNT charges under the rails leading to the rear. The operation moves to the next phase. A fuse hisses in the wet grass, counting down the last seconds of the old world. June 20th, night. The depth of the German rear, the forest, which the Germans considered merely landscape, turns into an active participant in combat operations. There is no front here in the traditional sense. The front is everywhere. Partisan detachments are not spontaneous groups of Avengers. They are an integrated part of the war machine. Special forces working on a single chronometer with the General Staff in Moscow. Operation Rail War is not harassing pinpricks. It is the total amputation of the transport circulatory system of Army Group Center. Cord checked. The whisper of the sabotage group commander is almost inaudible over the sound of the wind. Yes, sir. Charge at the joint. Detonator normal. Let's go. 3 minutes to the concert. Shadows dissolve into the thicket. A block of TNT remains lying on the railroad embankment, pressed against the cold steel of the rail. Tens of thousands of such blocks have been planted this night. The entire territory of Belarus occupied by the enemy is entangled in an invisible web of explosives. It is a logistical noose thrown around the Wehrmacht's neck. The Germans sleep in their trains. Guards patrol the stations, confident they control the situation. But control is an illusion. Reality is a timer that is about to hit zero. The explosion tears the night silence not with a single pop, but with a continuous roar rolling from Vitebsk to Brest, the synchronous detonation of 40,000 rails. It sounds as if the earth itself decided to shake off steel shackles. Flashes light up the sky for hundreds of kilometers. Steel hardened in the factories of the Ruhr snaps like a rotten thread. Ties shatter into splinters. In 1 second, the capacity of the railways drops to zero. This is not just sabotage. This is paralysis. A heavy freight train with ammunition for the 3rd Panzer Army rushes toward the front at full steam. The engineer peers into the darkness, but physics cannot be cheated. A break in the track. The locomotive derails, burying its nose in the gravel of the embankment. The inertia of thousands of tons of metal does its job. Wagons packed with shells slam into each other, crumple like an accordion, pile up on one another, forming surreal pyramids of twisted iron. The screech of metal drowns out the screams of men. Then, the ammunition detonates. A fireball rises above the forest, illuminating the disaster with a deathly light. "Base, answer!" A German Oberleutnant screams into the receiver of a field telephone on the stretch near Orsha. "Sector 12-8, train derailed, tracks destroyed. We need repair crews." In response, the crackle of static. Telephone lines are cut. Communication poles are sawed down and lying along the roads. There is no connection. Command is lost. Garrisons scattered across stations find themselves in a vacuum. They are blind and deaf. They do not yet know that they have become islanders in an ocean of hostile forest. Wehrmacht logistics, famous for their pedantry, collapse like a house of cards. Fuel for tanks intended to arrive in the morning is burning out in cisterns near Bobruisk. Shells for artillery, vitally necessary to repel an attack, are scattered along embankments near Mogiliev. Spare parts, medicines, food,
All this turns into a pile of garbage. A tank division without diesel is just a warehouse of immobile iron. An artillery battery without shells is a collection of useless pipes. Sabotage does not hit the soldiers. It hits the function of the army, depriving it of the ability to move and shoot. German repair battalions try to patch the holes, but for every restored rail, there is a new explosion. The partisans do not leave. They control the consequences. Snipers take out officers trying to organize work. Sappers place booby traps on approach paths. This is a war of attrition, where the Germans have neither a chance nor time. The resource of rails is exhausted. Stocks of track material in warehouses are destroyed. To restore movement, weeks are needed, and they do not even have hours. Movement to Minsk is blocked, the dispatcher reports at rear headquarters. His voice trembles. He looks at the railway map where red crosses mark explosion sites. The map is entirely red.
Route the trains around. Through Baranovichi. Impossible, Herr Colonel. The bridge was blown 10 minutes ago. We are in a bag. The strategy of indirect action in absolute form. The murder of the army happens even before the first Soviet tank comes out onto the line of fire. German generals, accustomed to operating with divisions and corps, face an enemy that cannot be encircled because he is everywhere. Chaos in the rear breeds panic. Security soldiers who are supposed to protect communications are demoralized. They fear every bush, every shadow. Fear paralyzes the will faster than a bullet. This is a surgical operation. Partisans cut off the Wehrmacht's limbs, leaving the torso to bleed out. An immobilized enemy is a dead enemy. He just hasn't realized the fact of his death yet. The acoustics of war change. Instead of the rhythmic clacking of wheels, the roar of tearing metal and the crackle of fires, the smell of burning ties soaked in creosote becomes the main smell of this night. This stench clogs the lungs, eats into uniforms. The smell of catastrophe. By dawn, the transport collapse becomes irreversible. Hundreds of trains are frozen on the tracks, becoming ideal targets for attack aviation that will arrive a little later. The German war machine, this most complex mechanism tuned for years, is broken. The gears spin, but there is no traction. The shafts have snapped. The engine roars but does not pull. It is quiet in the forest. The partisan group coils the wires of the blasting machines. Their work is done. They did the main thing. They stopped time for the enemy. Now the Germans cannot maneuver reserves. They are chained to their positions like a condemned man to an execution post. "Returning to base," commands the senior officer. "Next, the gods of war will work." And they leave, dissolving into the pre-dawn fog. And in the east, behind the front line, artillery crews are already removing covers from the breeches of thousands of guns. Barrels rise into the sky, measuring elevation angles. Target coordinates are entered. Paralysis gives way to the inevitability of destruction. The night of the saboteurs ends. The morning of the artillerymen begins. The gates of hell are about to open, and the keys have already been turned in the lock. June 23rd, 5 o'clock in the morning. The air over Belarus is thick and damp with morning mist. In the German trenches of the first line of defense, soldiers rub their eyes, preparing for the changing of the guard. They hear birds singing, unsuspecting that these are the last sounds of living nature they will perceive. On the watches of the artillery commanders of the 4 Soviet fronts, the second hands freeze vertically at the 12 mark. In this fraction of a second, 31,000 guns, mortars, and multiple launch rocket systems simultaneously eject tons of white-hot steel into the sky. This is not thunder. Thunder is a natural phenomenon that has pauses. Here, there are no pauses. A sound wave of such density that it becomes material. It hits the chest, knocks the air out of the lungs, bursts capillaries in the eyes. The horizon in the east disappears, replaced by a solid wall of flashes. The artillery preparation of Operation Bagration has no analogues in history in terms of fire density. Up to 200 barrels are concentrated per 1 kilometer of the breakthrough front. According to combat manuals, this is no longer suppression of defense. This is the annihilation of the landscape. The term ploughing here is not a metaphor, but an exact description of the technological process. Shells grind the soil to a depth of up to 3 meters, mixing black earth, sand, barbed wire, the wood of dugouts, and human bodies into a homogeneous, bloody mass. The first blow hits the trenches and observation posts. 152mm ML-20 howitzer cannons work on the concrete. A high-explosive shell weighing 43 kilograms, hitting a pillbox roof, does not just punch through it. The kinetic energy of the impact is such that the concrete crumbles into dust, and inside the enclosed space, an area of monstrous overpressure arises. People inside are not killed by shrapnel. They are killed by physics. Internal organs rupture from the pressure drop. Blood spurts from ears and noses. Those who did not die instantly turn into shell-shocked shells of men, deprived of reason and coordination. Next, the gods of war of a different caliber join in. Guards mortars BM-13, the famous Katyushas. Their howl cannot be confused with anything. It is the sound of the fabric of the universe tearing. Rocket projectiles cover areas by the hectare. The temperature at the epicenter of the explosion is such that sand sinters into glass. Forest masses where German infantry took cover flare up like matchboxes. Trees do not fall, they are sheared off by the shock wave at the root or split into fibers. The chance to survive in a trench under such fire equals a mathematical 0. The earth shakes with an amplitude that does not allow one to stand on one's feet. Seismographs hundreds of kilometers from the front record ground vibrations similar to a medium-strength earthquake. Hysteria reigns in the German radio network, drowned out by the static crackle of discharges. "Sector Anton, we are being destroyed!" screams the radio operator of an infantry regiment. His voice breaks into a squeal. "A wall of fire! We don't see the sun! Everything is burning! Where is the Luftwaffe?"
Where is the artillery? Hold positions, the speaker wheezes in response.
There is nothing to hold. There are no positions. Only craters here. No one on the other end of the line can grasp the scale of what is happening. The German defense, built over years, the impregnable rampart, disappears in 120 minutes. Barbed wire fences in 5 rows evaporate. Minefields detonate in a chain reaction, adding their voice to the general symphony of destruction. Soviet artillery applies the method of the rolling barrage. A wall of explosions rolls forward ahead of the advancing infantry, sweeping away everything living in its path. The step of the barrage is 100 meters. The tempo is 2 minutes. This is a conveyor of death, working with the precision of a Swiss chronometer. An error in calculation of 1 second means hitting one's own troops, so the crews work like robots. Load, aim, fire, barrel recoil, ejection of the casing. The smell of gunpowder is so thick it can be cut with a knife. The psychological effect of the artillery preparation is more terrible than physical destruction. Surviving German soldiers in the third line of defense, seeing the first and second lines simply cease to exist, fall into a stupor. Blood flows from their noses due to the constant vibration. They do not hear commands. Their will is paralyzed by animal terror before a power that is impossible to resist. This is not a battle of soldier against soldier. This is a battle of man against the relentless element of fire and steel. Artillery knocks the spirit out of the Wehrmacht even before the first Soviet soldier steps into the enemy trench. 2 hours later, the cannonade shifts sharply deep into the defense. Silence falls. But this is not the silence of peace. It is the ringing in the ears after concussion. The landscape is unrecognizable. Landmarks are erased. Where there was a grove, smoking stumps. Where there was a village, a stove chimney and a pile of bricks. Where there was a pillbox, a crater 10 meters in diameter. In this dead, plowed desert, amidst gray dust and soot, a green flare rises, the signal to attack. In the haze, amidst the twisted earth, a new sound appears, the low, rumbling bass of diesel engines. It grows, causing the remnants of glass in German officers' binoculars to vibrate. From clouds of dust and smoke, angular silhouettes with long barrels float out. Steel pincers begin to close. The time of artillery is over. The time of armor and maneuver has arrived. The tank armies start their engines. June 24th. Operational space. The roar of V2 diesels merges into a single low-frequency vibration, felt not by the ears, but by the diaphragm. Soviet tank armies enter operational space. But this is not the frontal attack German strategists have become accustomed to over 3 years of war. This is a new geometry of death. Tank wedges do not storm cities turned by Hitler into fortresses. They ignore them. Steel columns flow around nodes of resistance like water flows around stones in a turbulent stream, leaving enemy garrisons in the deep, hopeless rear. Speed becomes more important than armor. The tempo of the offensive is the main caliber of this operation. The T-34-85 tank performs here not as a duelist, but as an instrument of deep breakthrough. Its wide tracks create ground pressure less than a human foot, only 0.7 kilograms per square centimeter. This allows the 32-ton machines to go where German maps draw impassable swamps. The mechanics of the maneuver are simple and brutal. Cut supply lines, cut roads, close the ring, and move on without looking back. Near Vitebsk, a textbook shutting of the trap occurs. 5 German divisions of the 53rd Army Corps, having received the Führer's categorical order to hold the fortress to the last bullet, suddenly discover that the fortress has turned into a crypt. Soviet tank corps of the 6th Guards and 39th Armies link up west of the city. The ring is closed. The walls of the cauldron are not a thin line of infantry, but a solid screen of anti-tank artillery, turning its barrels inward toward the encirclement. Inside the helmet of a Soviet tank commander, the airwaves crackle, full of short, chopped commands. No lyrics, only coordinates and vectors of movement. Diamond 2, strong point right on course. Germans in the cowsheds. I see it. Bypass left. Do not engage. The motorized rifles will handle this. Our task is the highway to Lapel. Forward! Speed! Tanks rush past stunned German blocking positions, dousing them with exhaust fumes and mud. The turrets do not even turn toward the enemy. They have no time for small prey. Further south, near Bobrusk, an even grander drama unfolds. The German 9th Army finds itself squeezed between the Berezina and Dnieper rivers. Rokossovsky applies a double strike here, classic pincers. 2 tank corps punch through the defense and meet in the area of the crossings. 40,000 Wehrmacht soldiers and officers end up in a bag of fire. This is no longer an army. It is a crowd of armed men deprived of command, fuel, and hope. The structure of the cauldron is mathematically calibrated strangulation. The area occupied by the encircled troops shrinks rapidly. With every hour, the density of troops in the bag grows, turning any point on the map into an ideal target.
German elite units try to break through. They assemble strike groups, throwing the last Panthers and assault guns into battle. But the physics of war works against them. Attempts to break out hit prepared anti-tank lines. Soviet tank destroyer regiments deploy 76mm ZIS-3 guns for direct fire. Armor piercing! Reference point, the tree line! Tanks! Screams the battery commander. Shot. Recoil. Ringing of the casing. Black smoke from pierced German armor. Combat distance, 300 meters. At such a range, it is impossible to miss. German columns trying to break out of the ring turn into graveyards of burning metal. Roads are clogged with skeletons of trucks and armored personnel carriers, creating jams that make maneuver impossible. Inside the cauldrons, agony begins. Order and discipline, which the Wehrmacht was so proud of, disappear. Only the instinct of self-preservation remains, driving men into senseless attacks against machine guns. Officers tear off epaulets, trying to blend in with the soldiers. Staff cars burn along with secret documents. Contact with Berlin is lost, and the last radio messages are a cry for help going into the void.
We are surrounded. We have no ammunition. Russian tanks are in our rear. What should we do? Screams the radio operator of the 9th Army. There is no answer. The airwaves are clogged with Russian commands. The strategy of cauldrons is not just the destruction of manpower, it is the destruction of the enemy's time. While encircled divisions are ground into flour, the main forces of the Red Army move far to the west. Encircled groups work like black holes, absorbing German reserves that try to relieve them, but do not manage to even approach the outer ring of encirclement. The enemy's maneuvering space shrinks to the size of a patch of land swept by gunfire. June 27th. The Bobruisk cauldron is liquidated. The Vitebsk cauldron is cleared. The road to Minsk is open. A hole 400 kilometers wide gapes in the German defense, with nothing to plug it. Soviet tank corps, without reducing speed, change tracks on the move and refuel from wheels. Mechanic drivers sleep 2 hours a day, resting their heads on control levers. The vibration of the engine replaces their pulse. Eyes are red from dust and lack of sleep, but the thrill of the chase drowns out fatigue. Ahead is the capital of Belarus. The race continues, and he who stops will die. June 28th. The operational map becomes hopelessly outdated every half hour. The concept of a front line disappears, dissolving in the dust of country roads. The largest survival race in the history of the Second World War begins. Soviet tank armies switch to a mode of non-stop gallop. The tempo of the offensive is cranked up to 50 or 60 kilometers a day. For heavy tracked vehicles, this is an extreme mode bordering on technical suicide. The resource of diesels is used up 3 times faster than the norm. Transmissions howl from overheating, wheel rims smoke. But the order forward cancels the laws of physics. This is a classic blitzkrieg, turned 180 degrees. Only now, Soviet tankers are the hunters, and the remnants of the once formidable Army Group Center are the game. German columns retreat west, trying to break away, but Russian tanks move faster. They move on parallel courses, along forest clearings, across fields, overtaking the enemy to meet him not from behind, but head-on at the next intersection. The psychology of the German soldier breaks completely. They are used to danger being behind them, but now death awaits them ahead, in the deep rear, which just yesterday was considered a safe zone. Inside the T-34s, the heat is hellish. Ventilators cannot cope. The air temperature in the fighting compartment rises to 45 degrees. Sweat pours into eyes, mixing with soot and oily dust. Crews work on pure adrenaline and automatism. Sleep becomes an impermissible luxury.
They sleep in snatches, 2 hours at a time, right on the armor or leaning against the wheels during refueling. Food is a dry crust in a pocket and a sip of warm water from a flask. The body is exhausted, but the brain registers only one goal: Minsk. "Water is boiling, temperature 95, the engine will seize!" screams the driver-mechanic through the noise of the transmission. His face is black with soot, hands trembling from the tension on the levers. "Hold the RPMs," growls the commander, pressing into the sight. "Do not stop. If we stop, we won't make it. Forward, Vanya. Squeeze the soul out of her." "Holding!" The tank jerks over a rise and gains speed again. They do not stop to finish off scattered groups of Germans. Their task is more global, to slam the lid of a giant cauldron. German units rushing to take up defense near Minsk simply do not manage to reach the trenches. They are crushed on the march. Tracks crush cannons that did not even have time to deploy into combat position. Trucks with infantry caught unawares on the highway turn into torches before the soldiers can jump to the ground. This is not a battle. This is a steamroller running over an anthill. Offensive logistics work on the edge of the possible. Fuel tankers move in the combat formations of tanks. Shells are brought up by captured trucks. Repair flyers weld armor and change tracks right in the field, under fire. Time is the main resource. Whoever reaches the crossings over the Berezina and Svizloch first wins. The Germans blow up bridges, but Soviet sappers erect crossings in hours, not days. Tanks go along the bottom, with hatched batten down and snorkel tubes, bursting onto the bank like steel amphibians, sowing panic by their appearance where they were not expected. By July 3rd, the race reaches its climax. Rotmistrov's 5th Guards Tank Army from the north and the 2nd Guards Tank Corps from the south slam into the outskirts of Minsk. The German garrison, preparing for a long defense, finds itself sliced into pieces in a few hours. Battles are fought not for blocks, but for a through passage. Soviet armor bursts into the city center. Burning tigers and panthers clutter the avenues. The screech of metal on cobblestones drowns out the screams. On this day, the main trap slams shut. East of Minsk, in the forests, a 105,000-strong group of the German 4th Army finds itself surrounded. Escape routes to the west are cut by the steel tourniquet of Soviet tank corps. Minsk is liberated, but for the Germans, this means not just the loss of a city, it means the loss of an exit. The ring has closed. Strategic initiative has been finally realized into geographical fact. "Dawn, this is Falcon." The radio rasps in the command tank on the central square of ruined Minsk. "The ring is closed. Not a mouse will slip through." "Copy, Falcon. Cut the engines. Let the men sleep." Silence descends on the city, along with the twilight. But this is a deceptive silence. Beyond the ring of encirclement, in the forests, 100,000 armed men realize they are cut off from the world. Their command promised Fortress Minsk, but the fortress fell while they were walking to it. The speed of the Soviet offensive became the very factor that turned the organized retreat of the Wehrmacht into a catastrophe of biblical scale. He who did not make it was late forever. Blitzkrieg returned to its homeland, but its creators now spoke Russian. The Minsk Cauldron, east of the Belarusian capital, July 4th. In forest masses and on narrow country roads, a gigantic mass of men and equipment is jammed. More than 100,000 soldiers and officers of the German 4th Army. They are deprived of centralized command, but retain the inertia of movement to the west, trying to find a breach in the Soviet ring. They do not yet understand that maneuvering space has vanished. The ground under their feet no longer belongs to them, and the sky overhead is turning into a scaffold. The weather, which hid the retreating troops with low cloud cover for several days, clears. The time of aviation arrives. The Soviet command decides not to risk infantry and tanks in dense forests, where every bush can hide an ambush. The air fleet enters the fray. Assault aviation receives carte blanche for free hunting. The main instrument of this phase of the operation is the IL-2 aircraft. This is not just a winged machine, it is a flying tank. Its foundation is an armored hull, a steel tub protecting the engine and pilot's cockpit from ground fire. The Germans call it Black Death, or the concrete plane. For Soviet pilots, it is a working tool designed to grind mechanized columns into mincemeat. The tactics of using attack aircraft in these days are honed to conveyor belt automatism. Groups of IL-2s approach targets in echeloned waves. They form a carousel over German columns, a closed circle allowing them to continuously pour fire on the enemy. While one flight pulls out of the attack, the next is already opening fire. Intervals between runs, seconds. The Germans, trapped on narrow forest roads and log paths through swamps, have no chance to turn around. They cannot drive off to the side, there is quagmire. They are locked in their own vehicles like in metal coffins. 5, this is 1, the voice of the group leader sounds in the headphones, a calm, businesslike tone, as if talking about plowing, not killing. I see the column, square 17. Head at the bridge, tail in the forest.
We work according to the classic. I'll cap the head.
3, take the tail. Understood 1, going in. The lead attack aircraft drops into a dive. Angle, 30 degrees. Altitude, treetop level. Rockets tear from the wings. The explosion of the lead vehicle on the bridge instantly creates a jam. Movement is paralyzed. The following attack aircraft hits the rear vehicle. The column halts. Now, it is not an army. It is a stationary target several kilometers long. Methodical destruction begins. 23mm VYA-23 cannons stitch through the roofs of trucks and armored personnel carriers. Shells tear metal, explode gas tanks, turn drivers and passengers into biological mass. But the most terrible weapon in the IL-2's arsenal is the PTAB, anti-tank aviation bombs. Each weighs only 1.5 or 2.5 kilograms. There are hundreds of them in the bomb bays of a single attack aircraft. When dropped, they cover an area like a carpet. The shaped charge of the small bomb burns through up to 70 millimeters of armor. For the roof of a Tiger or Panther, this is more than enough. Tanks that are impossible to take head-on on the ground flare up like torches from the air. A jet of molten metal bursts into the fighting compartment, detonating the ammunition. Turrets weighing several tons are ripped off and thrown aside like tin lids. Below, a hell devoid of any heroism is taking place. It is a technical slaughter. German anti-aircraft defenses are suppressed in the first minutes. Soldiers rush between burning vehicles, trying to find cover in the forest. But the forest is also burning. Fragmentation bombs mow down infantry hiding in ditches. The roar of explosions, the howl of engines on afterburner, and the crackle of cannons merge into a continuous drone that ruptures eardrums. Smoke from burning fuel and rubber rises in black pillars, visible for tens of kilometers. 1, ammo empty, the wingman reports.
Porridge on the road, no movement.
Copy, returning to base. Relief is on approach. New flights appear in the sky. The conveyor does not stop for a minute. Pilots see below not people, but the texture of destruction. Black skeletons of equipment, gray patches of infantry, orange flowers of explosions. This is grueling work. Pilots fly 5 or 6 combat sorties a day. Mechanics at airfields drop from exhaustion hanging bombs and loading belts, while pilots smoke without taking off their flight helmets. Hands tremble not from fear, but from the vibration of the control stick. By the end of the day, forest roads east of Minsk cease to be transport arteries. They turn into graveyards of metal. Tens of kilometers of burnt equipment. Melted skeletons of Mercedes, Opels, Hanomags stand bumper to bumper. Asphalt and soil are soaked with oil, gasoline, and blood. So much that this mixture squelches underfoot. Surviving Germans, deafened, shell-shocked, demoralized, come out of the forest with their hands up. They have no more weapons, no will, no army. Aviation didn't just win. It ground a 100,000-strong group into dust, proving that in modern war, air superiority is an absolute verdict for those below. Army Group Center has finally ceased to exist as a military force. Only a crowd remains, facing a final march. But not to Berlin, but to the east. July 17th, 1944, Moscow. Air temperature is 82 degrees Fahrenheit. The asphalt of the Garden Ring melts under the sun, but the city does not feel the heat. It has frozen in anticipation of a spectacle that has no analogues in the history of world wars. For the first time, the enemy enters the capital, not as a conqueror, but as biomass deprived of will and future. The logistics of this operation, the Big Waltz, were conducted by the NKVD with the same impeccable precision with which the army conducted Bagration. Dozens of trains, thousands of cattle cars, a rigid unloading schedule at freight stations. 57,600 people. Exactly that many former soldiers and officers of the Wehrmacht were delivered to Moscow to walk their final march. This is not a parade. A parade implies rhythm, music, a goose step. Here, there are no drums, no orchestras. The only sound filling the wide avenues is a shuffling. The shuffling of tens of thousands of souls dragging along the asphalt. The sound of a giant caterpillar crawling to its end. The silence is such that the breathing of this multi-thousand crowd is audible. But sound does not dominate. Smell dominates. The heavy, sour stench of unwashed bodies, rotting bandages, cloth unwashed for a long time, and animal fear. This smell covers the streets in a dense cloud, forcing Muscovites to instinctively raise handkerchiefs to their faces. Generals lead the column. 19 generals and 6 colonels. Those who, just a month ago, drew arrows on maps in cozy bunkers near Vitebsk and Bobruisk, now walk on foot, looking at their feet. Medals are left on their uniforms. Stalin's order designed to emphasize the depth of the fall. The shine of iron crosses and knight's crosses now does not symbolize valor, it underscores the absurdity of their position. They try to maintain posture, but physics cannot be cheated. Shoulders are slumped. Gazes are unfocused. They walk past buildings they planned to blow up, along streets they intended to rename. Following them is the grey mass. There is no division into elite units and Volkssturm here. Tankers, infantrymen, artillerymen, signalmen, all mixed into a single stream of the defeated. These are no longer the blonde beasts from propaganda posters of 1941, sleeves rolled up and laughing into camera lenses. These are broken men, many walking barefoot, feet wrapped in rags. Uniforms, once perfectly tailored, hang like sacks, soaked in sweat and the mud of Belarusian swamps. There is no hatred in their eyes. In them is only emptiness and animal terror before the crowd standing on the sidewalks. They expected reprisals, stones, sticks, lynching. But they met something more terrible: contempt. The sidewalks are packed with people, hundreds of thousands of Muscovites. Women, old men, teenagers, night shift workers, doctors, engineers. They stand as a solid wall, creating a living corridor. Police stand in a sparse chain, but their intervention is not required. No one lunges at the prisoners. The silence of the crowd presses harder than an artillery barrage. It is the heavy, physically palpable silence of a people who have realized their strength. They look at the passing Germans not as humans, but as captured parasites, like a natural disaster that has finally been brought under control. "Look, Hans is walking," an elderly worker in a cap says quietly, gripping the railing. His voice is calm, without malice, just stating a fact. "Wanted Moscow land? Here it is. Eat it with your souls." "They aren't people," a woman with a tired face answers him, clutching a child. "Locusts. Just locusts." "Quiet!" A soldier with an empty tunic sleeve cuts them off. "Let them walk. Let them memorize this route. There will be no return ticket." Short phrases whispered among the prisoners are heard in the crowd. German soldiers are afraid to raise their eyes. "Where are they taking us? To Siberia?" "Shut up, Kurt. Just walk. If you fall, they'll shoot." "Look at these houses. They are intact. Goebbels lied. Moscow stands. We lost before we even started." The march lasts for hours. An endless gray river flows along the garden ring, turns toward the train stations, splits into streams. But the culmination of this act comes in the finale. Behind the rear columns of prisoners appear not guards, but municipal service vehicles, street cleaning trucks. Their brushes spin, jets of high-pressure water hit the asphalt. This is the supreme act of symbolic purification. Water washes away the dirt, dust, and that very smell of fear left by the enemy army. The asphalt becomes black and clean again. The trace of 57,000 occupiers is erased in a few minutes. For Western observers present at the march, this is a shock. Military attachés of the USA and Great Britain watch this procession from the balconies of embassies and hotels. They see the scale of the Wehrmacht's catastrophe with their own eyes. These are not dry numbers in Soviet Information Bureau reports, which they are accustomed to distrusting in the West. This is living proof of collapse. Army Group Center didn't just retreat, it physically relocated into Russian captivity. The myth of the invincibility of the German war machine is finally washed into the sewers of Moscow streets, along with the dirty water of the cleaning trucks. The asphalt dries quickly. City life returns to its usual course. Trams chime at intersections again. But the geopolitical reality has changed irreversibly. The prisoners load into trains to go rebuild the cities they destroyed. And on the map of Europe, where the monolithic Eastern Front used to be, a gigantic void, hundreds of kilometers wide, gapes. And this void means only one thing. The path to Berlin is open, not only strategically, but morally. The backbone of Nazism is broken, and the sound of this fracture was heard by the whole world on the Moscow pavement. Ahead lie Poland and the border of the Reich. The war moves into the phase of retribution. While the street cleaners on the Garden Ring wash away the physical traces of Army Group Center's existence, a tectonic shift occurs on strategic maps in the headquarters of all warring powers. The geography of war changes instantly and irreversibly. In the center of the Eastern Front, where a concrete monolith of German defense stood 2 weeks ago, a void now gapes. This is not just a breakthrough. It is a hole 400 kilometers wide. The distance from Polotsk to Bobruisk now represents open gates through which Soviet tank armies enter without knocking. There is nothing to plug this breach with. The Wehrmacht has no more strategic reserves in this direction. Absolute vacuum. This is no longer an operational crisis. It is a catastrophe of planetary scale. The front the Germans held for years collapses like dominoes. The destruction of the central pillar leads to the inevitable collapse of the flanks. Army Group North, pinned to the Baltic, finds itself in a critical position. Its communications are cut. It hangs in the air, awaiting inevitable isolation in Courland. In the south, Army Group North Ukraine also exposes its flanks. The entire gigantic arc of the front from the Baltic Sea to the Carpathian Mountains begins to crack and fall apart. The integrity of the German defense is lost forever. Now it is not a unified line, but a set of isolated pockets of resistance that the Soviet steamroller crushes one by one. In Hitler's Wolf's Lair headquarters in East Prussia, the atmosphere of a madhouse reigns. The conditioned air of the bunker is soaked with fear and denial of reality. The Führer is hunched over a huge table covered with maps. His hands tremble. On paper, divisions, regiments, and corps groups still exist. Colored flags stand on the lines of rivers and cities, but these are phantoms. These divisions no longer exist in nature.
They burned in tank furnaces near Minsk, rotted in the swamps of the Berezina,
Or are shuffling their souls along Moscow asphalt right now. But to admit this is to admit the end of the Third Reich. "Transfer the 12th Panzer Division near Lida," Hitler screams hysterically, poking a finger at the map. "Immediately organize a counterstrike with the forces of Corps Felix. Why aren't they attacking?" Colonel General Guderian, chief of the General Staff, looks at his leader with the heavy, unblinking gaze of a professional staring into the abyss. "My Führer," Guderian's voice is dry and brittle like old parchment. "The 12th Division does not exist. Corps Felix ceased communication 3 days ago. We have no forces for a counterstrike. Between the Russian tanks and East Prussia, there are only rear services and convalescent battalions." "You are lying!" Hitler breaks into a shriek, sweeping maps off the table. "This is betrayal. I will find reserves.
Pull troops from Normandy. Pull them from Norway."
But physics and logistics cannot be shouted down. Transferring divisions from the Western Front takes weeks. Railways in Germany are already under Allied airstrikes, and Soviet tanks cover 50 kilometers a day. The tempo of the Russian offensive outpaces the speed of decision-making in Berlin. While the German staff draws a defense line on one river, Soviet forward detachments are already crossing the next one, 100 kilometers further west. Orders from Berlin arrive in a void. There are no more addressees. Army headquarters are destroyed or fleeing, losing documents and encryption machines. Command of troops in the east is lost completely. At the same time, a cold sobering is happening in London and Washington. The Allies, having just landed in Normandy and bogged down in heavy fighting in the bocage of France, look east with amazement. They see a map where red ink is flooding Europe with frightening speed.
Wehrmacht losses in Operation Bagration exceed losses at Stalingrad.
This is the destruction of the most combat-capable part of the German army. Military analysts at the Pentagon and the Foreign Office place reports on the desks of the President and Prime Minister with the same conclusion. The Soviet Union is capable of finishing the war alone. "If we don't speed up, the Russians will be drinking tea on the banks of the Rhine before we reach Paris," a British planning staff officer remarks grimly, looking at the reports. Army Group Center is gone. The road to Berlin is open. It is a straight line, gentlemen. And on this line, there is nothing that could stop the red machine. The geopolitical balance shifts with the crash of a collapsing wall. The myth that Germany and the USSR would drain each other for years crumbles. The USSR demonstrates not just numerical superiority, but qualitative dominance in strategy. Bagration is a masterpiece of military art, where brute force was merely an instrument of subtle design. The Soviet General Staff outplayed the Prussian military school on its own field. Now the question is not who will win, but where will the winner stop?
The borders of the post-war world are being drawn right now by the tracks of T-34s on Polish soil. In the giant hole in the front, a vacuum effect occurs. Remnants of German troops are sucked into this vortex of chaos. Scattered groups try to break through to the west, but run into new Soviet units again and again. The front rolls back, leaving behind hundreds of kilometers of liberated territory. Vilnius, Brest, Kaunas, cities fall like overripe fruit. The German strategy of Festung, fortress cities, proves suicidal. Garrisons left to defend these nodes are simply bypassed and destroyed. Hitler forbids retreat, thereby signing the death warrant for tens of thousands more of his soldiers.
Strategic initiative has passed completely, 100%, into the hands of Moscow.
Berlin no longer dictates terms. It only reacts, and with fatal delay. Operation Bagration broke not only the Wehrmacht's back, it broke the German nation's faith in the possibility of a draw. Ahead looms only unconditional surrender. But for now, in the West, newspapers are full of headlines about Normandy, trying to shout down the roar of the Eastern Front. A new battle begins, the battle for the interpretation of history. A battle of narratives where the truth of numbers and maps will collide with political expediency. London and Washington rejoice. The front pages of leading newspapers of the free world are occupied by one topic: Normandy. June 6, 1944, is declared the day history turned back. Photographers shoot brave lads landing on Omaha Beach. Reporters file heroic sketches about battles in the hedgerows of France.
For the layman in New York or Manchester, the war looks like a black and white chronicle of the triumphal march of democracy. In this media reality, Berlin will fall under Allied blows, while the Eastern Front is somewhere far away, on the periphery of attention, where the Russians are simply finishing off a weak enemy. But this is a lie. The grandest, most cynical and bloodiest lie of this war. The truth, diligently silenced in high offices on the banks of the Thames and Potomac, is buried in blood in the Belarusian mud. The truth lies in the dry accounting of death. While the Allies gnaw through German defenses in France, advancing by kilometers, the Red Army in Belarus destroys divisions wholesale, advancing by hundreds of kilometers. The scale of events is incomparable. Operation Overlord is a complex amphibious operation. Operation Bagration is the strategic destruction of the main combat force of Nazi Germany. Statistics are a stubborn and cruel thing. At Stalingrad, which the whole world considers the symbol of the German catastrophe, the Wehrmacht lost, by various estimates, about 300,000 men. During Operation Bagration, Germany's losses exceed 400,000 killed, wounded, and captured in the first weeks alone. This is not just a defeat. This is the complete removal of an entire army group from reality. 17 divisions and 3 brigades destroyed completely. 50 divisions lost more than half their personnel. This is a hole in the war budget that cannot be closed. But on the front pages of the Times, this is written in small print on page 3. The information blockade in the West has a pragmatic goal. To admit the true scale of the Soviet Union's success is to admit its absolute dominance in Europe.
Politicians in London understand. If they tell their voters the truth about who exactly is grinding the backbone of Nazism, then after the war, it will be difficult to explain why one needs to be enemies with the Russians. Therefore, the filter is turned on. The Red Army's successes are presented as a natural consequence of Germany's weakening due to the opening of the Second Front. This is a war of narratives where journalists' ink tries to rewrite soldiers' blood. In the command dugout of the Third Belarusian Front, a kerosene lamp burns. A major of intelligence, unshaven, with eyes red from lack of sleep, throws a stack of captured German newspapers and a fresh issue of Pravda with reprints from the Allied press onto the table. "Read," he says hoarsely to an artillery captain. "Allies fighting heavy battles for Caen. Heavy battles. 2 regiments have been stomping in place for a week. And us?" The captain rolls a cigarette, his fingers black from gunpowder soot. "And us? Army Group Center is gone. Physically gone. But for them, apparently, these are local skirmishes." "Spit on it," the artilleryman inhales, blowing a stream of acrid smoke at the low ceiling. "Newspapers lie. Maps don't lie." "We are in Minsk. They aren't even in Paris yet. History isn't written in ink, Major. It's written by tank tracks." "Still, it's a shame." The Major grins, but his eyes remain cold. "We are winding guts onto tracks here, and they are opening champagne." "Let them drink. They still have to share Berlin with us." "We'll see who has the heavier hangover." German propaganda is in an even more schizophrenic state. Joseph Goebbels, the great architect of lies, is cornered. He cannot admit that the Eastern Front has collapsed. In the reports of the Supreme Command of the Wehrmacht, terms like straightening the front line, planned withdrawal, and shortening the defense line are used. But the average German is not an idiot.
He sees that the straightening is already happening at the borders of East Prussia. Death notices come not one by one, but in bundles. In every German city, there are families who have stopped receiving letters from fathers and sons serving in Army Group Center. The mail is silent because there is no one to write. In this silence, the true horror of the German nation is born. They realize the Russians are coming. And they are not coming like in 41, as a mob with 1 rifle for 3 men, as they were lied to. They are coming as a ruthless, technocratic killing machine. Germans listen to the radio, where cheerful voices tell of heroic defense, but then look at the map and see that between the Russian tanks and their homes, there is nothing. Fear of retribution becomes tangible. They know what they did in the East. And now the East has come to them to collect the debt. With interest. The war of narratives collides with reality on the fields of Belarus. Here, amidst wrecked equipment and thousands of uncollected corpses in mouse-gray uniforms, any lie crumbles. Western military attachés, whom Moscow invites to the battle sites, walk through this Wehrmacht graveyard with pale faces. They see endless columns of burnt tigers, fields strewn with German helmets, mountains of captured weapons. They write secret reports to their capitals, the tone of which differs strikingly from newspaper pathos. The Russians are not just winning, they are destroying Germany's military potential with the efficiency of an industrial press. If we do not speed up our advance, Stalin will dictate peace terms unilaterally, writes a British colonel in a cipher to London. The geopolitical shift happens right here. Not in Normandy, not in Italy, not in the Pacific. The fate of post-war Europe is being decided in the Belarusian forests. Here, the Soviet Union proves its right as a superpower, not with declarations, but with the tonnage of destroyed enemy force. Every kilometer of advance to the west is an argument that cannot be disputed at future conferences. Bagration becomes the factor that breaks not only the German army, but also the arrogance of the Allies. They are forced to reckon with a force capable of wiping a 1 million-man enemy group off the face of the earth in a month. But for soldiers in the trenches, geopolitics is unimportant. Something else matters to them. They see how the enemy changes. Captured Germans no longer look down on them. In their eyes is the submissiveness of cattle led to slaughter. The myth of racial superiority is trampled into the mud by the boots of Soviet infantry. And this is the main truth of the war.
The truth that strength lies not in loud words and beautiful headlines, but in the ability to do heavy, dirty, deadly work better than your enemy.
And they finished this work.
To complete, final silence on the airwaves of Army Group Center. August 29th, 1944. Official completion of the Belarusian strategic offensive operation. Fanfares sound in Soviet Information Bureau reports, and liberated cities are listed. But here, on the ground, the music sounds different. It is silence. Heavy, oppressive silence that sets in after millions of tons of explosives have ceased detonating. Smoke clears, revealing a panorama that has forever changed the demographics and geography of the continent. The strategic task is accomplished. Army Group Center is not just defeated, it is struck from the personnel rolls. But every victory has a price, and this price is billed not in rubles or Reichsmarks, but in human lives. The dry statistics of losses. 178,505 Soviet soldiers and officers. Irrecoverable losses. This is not just a figure in an archive ledger.
These are 178,000 death notices that will scatter across the entire Soviet Union, from Brest to Vladivostok. If you line these people up in a single rank, it would stretch for hundreds of kilometers. This is the price for 2 months of fighting. Another 587,000 men were wounded. Hospital logistics operate at the limit. Trains with sanitary cars go east in a continuous stream. Surgeons sleep 3 hours a day, removing shards of Krupp steel from living flesh. The smell of carbolic acid and blood becomes the main smell of the rear. The land of Belarus is oversaturated with iron. The density of metal in the soil is such that magnetic compasses in some grids go crazy. Sappers following the advancing units harvest a crop of death. Tens of thousands of mines, unexploded shells, abandoned munitions. This is work for decades. The war has moved west, but it left its poisonous trace here. The soil will have to be recultivated, craters filled, trenches leveled, but the bones will remain. In the forests near Minsk, in the swamps of Bobruisk, at the crossings over the Berezina, soldiers of 2 armies lie in layers. They have become part of the landscape, the foundation on which a new forest will grow. The chemistry of war turns into the biology of peace. But the main result of the operation is the broken backbone of Nazism. This is not a metaphor. The Wehrmacht lost its structure as a single organism. Until June of '44, the German army was a spring capable of compressing and expanding, delivering counterstrikes, maneuvering. After Bagration, the spring snapped. The mechanism is broken. Now it is just a set of scattered parts that can still kill, but can no longer win. Germany has lost the strategic initiative forever. They no longer choose where to accept battle. They only patch holes with the bodies of the Volkssturm and Hitler Youth. A glance at the map of Europe now causes nausea in German generals. The distance to Berlin is 600 kilometers. And on these 600 kilometers, there are no more natural barriers comparable to the Belarusian swamps or the wide Dnieper. Ahead is Poland. Flatland, tank-accessible terrain, a paradise for mechanized corps. Soviet tank armies, having tasted deep breakthroughs, look west as if at a racetrack. The psychological barrier is overcome. Before, Berlin was an abstract goal, a distant dream. Now it is just a dot on the map that must be reached, refueling at captured gas stations. A straight line. In the geometry of war, a straight line is the shortest path to victory. Soviet strategy straightened the front, shearing off the Belarusian balcony. Now this vector points exactly at the heart of the Reich. The Allies in the West, seeing the results of Bagration, finally realized the race to Berlin has begun,
and the Russians have pole position in this race.
The political landscape of the post-war world is being formed here, on the tracks of IS-2 tanks standing on the banks of the Vistula, cooling down after the march. For the soldier who survived this meat grinder, the world has changed. Fear of German technology has vanished. Tigers and Ferdinands burn just like everything else if you know where to hit. The myth of German order has vanished. They saw supermen running, abandoning the wounded and banners. A cold, calculating anger of a professional has appeared. They learned to fight not with numbers, but with skill. Camouflage, reconnaissance, combined arms interaction. Now these are not lines from a manual, but instincts hammered into the subcortex. The army of 41, dying in cauldrons, has been reborn into the army of 44, which creates these cauldrons. This victory is paid for in terrible currency. We, living today, walk on land that was bought from death at an exchange rate of 1 to 1. Every kilometer of liberated territory is someone's interrupted life. This is not pathos. This is the physics of a nation's existence. We exist only because 178,000 people remained lying in the Belarusian earth, ensuring the passage of tank wedges with their bodies. Their death became the fuel for our future. This is the foundation. It is invisible, hidden under a layer of time and asphalt, but it supports the entire weight of our reality. Operation Bagration is complete. The catastrophe of the Wehrmacht has occurred. History has turned a page written in blood and opened a new one, the chapter of the finale. Ahead, there will still be heavy battles. There will be Warsaw. There will be Budapest. There will be the Zilo Heights. The beast still snarls. He is dangerous in his agony. But the outcome is foregone. The verdict was passed and signed in June to August of 44. Execution of the sentence is merely a matter of time and logistics. Tanks start their engines. Infantry adjusts kit bags. Artillery moves out of positions. The road to Berlin is open. The movement continues.